Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the final Rig Run Recovery Zone webinar. I'm Katie from Rig Run, and today we have Ben Kilner with us, who's going to speak to us about his Olympic snowboarding journey. Hi, Ben. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. How's things?
All good. So looking forward to hearing your speech. I will turn off just now and have a chat at the end.
Okay. All right. So obviously, my name is Ben Kilner. I'm a former two-time Winter Olympian. I went to the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver, and then on to the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi in Russia. And obviously, I'm a bit older now compared to the days back then when I was in my prime. But I'm currently 34 years old now. When I obviously first started snowboarding, I was born and raised in Aberdeen. I lived out in Banchory, and going right back to the winters when we used to get plenty of snow, my parents actually decided to get me a snowboard lesson when I was about 8 years old, to the local resorts up at Glenshee. And it kind of just ended up stemming from there. I loved it so much. My dad, he was very sporty himself. He was introducing me to all these sports: tennis, golf, football, and he kind of took me up snowboarding. Little been known to him that I actually fell so much in love with the sport that I wanted to do it full time. So it took quite a while to actually get everything kind of snowballing, no pun intended. But it ended up getting to the point where I was probably about maybe 10 or 11 when things started to get a little bit more competitive. So this is kind of at this point then people were actually telling my parents that I should get myself abroad more often, into the British Championships, that sort of thing. And I think it didn't really hit me properly until I was about 13 years old, and that's when the Salt Lake City Winter Olympics were on TV, and I just remember watching these snowboarders on the TV, and honestly, these guys were, in my opinion, some of the coolest people on the planet. There was a Finnish snowboarder called Heikki Sorsa, who always caught my attention, and I don't know if anyone did watch or remember the Winter Olympics back then, but he had this massive mohawk, and he kind of dyed it a different color, and I just remember seeing him and thinking, that's all I want to do in life. I just want to go to the Olympics and represent my country. So I was 13 at the time, and a little later on in that season I got invited out to America. This is the first time I'd kind of traveled abroad, and I actually entered into a competition in California, and all these guys that were literally competing at Salt Lake City were competing in the same event, and my mind was sort of blown at the time that I was actually meeting like my heroes, and that's really what kind of accelerated the sort of momentum of kind of motivation, making sure that I did get to an Olympic Games. So this is kind of obviously the beginning part of my career, and I tried really hard to get points to go to the Turin Winter Olympics. I wasn't actually old enough to do the full season of the World Cup, so you had to be 16 to do the World Cups, and I turned 16 kind of halfway into the season, and unfortunately fell 5 points short of actually qualifying. So that to me was probably one of the biggest hits, and when I look back now, it's probably one of the biggest things that fueled me to make sure that I did get to the next one in 2010 in Vancouver in Canada. And I had to make some pretty important decisions at that time. I was very heavily kind of traveled at that point, and I had to make a decision to leave school early. I think my coach had kind of made it apparent to me that it was either sort of school or sport, So I remember going into Banbury Academy. They were super supportive with my whole career, but I had to make that decision that I needed to go full time. So when I did turn 16, that's pretty much the moment where I could kind of call my sport a profession at that point. I think the sort of sponsorship contracts came in, and the career kind of took off at that point then. So yeah, I mean, there was obviously loads of challenges on the way. There was injuries, financial side of things where, I mean, the financial side, like snowboarding, I think my mum and dad were obviously at that point, they were thinking, oh, snowboarding, it can't be too bad, but it's a very expensive sport. And for anyone that's obviously been on a winter holiday, they probably realize like your flights, your accommodation, your lift passes. I had sort of entry fees on top of that. There was all the sports insurance and then the equipment. I mean, it's a brutally expensive sport, but one of the funnest sports, obviously, that you can do as well. But yeah, it was fairly brutal. And when I talk about other obstacles, obviously injuries were another huge part. We were constantly getting injured. It might be broken wrists, the sort of ankles, knees, ribs, your back, and I think when I look back, quite a lot of my old teammates, they would suffer some bigger injuries than most. But yeah, we were, at times it was kind of, some people were dropping like flies, but if you managed to get through that side of things, you were lucky to get out the other side. And these days, most of my injuries don't really come back to haunt me, whereas a couple of friends have probably been through it. They've kind of been through the wars. But yeah, I think going back to obviously the sort of Olympic journey, when I finally qualified for Vancouver 2010, there was a moment where I finally gathered enough points. I called my mum, and I remember sort of phoning her and just saying, "Oh, mum, I think that's it. I've qualified for the Olympics," like unofficially at the time. But I just remember like my mum burst into tears. She was crying. I was sort of tears in my eyes as well. I was like, I can't believe it. Finally made it. And I think when you officially get that phone call from Team GB that's basically saying they would like you to take part and represent the country, I think that I can't just really truly describe what that feels like. It's almost like, it felt like at the time I'd dedicated my whole life to that point, for that feeling. But really, when you do get that phone call, that's kind of when the real true work begins. You then realize, like, right, I don't want to just get to the Olympics now. I actually want to go there to perform. So we got taken out to Calgary. This was where Team GB had their holding camp, and we were there for 2 weeks to acclimatise, to get used to the time zone, and it was a pretty cool place actually in Calgary. We had pretty much the whole team there. The curlers were there, the bobsleigh, the skeleton, the ice skaters, skiers. All of us were pretty much there, and we even spent quite a lot of time with Princess Anne, and she managed to come out and meet us. And I had a World Cup in Calgary. Luckily, it all kind of fell into place, and got my first my first World Cup bronze. So that was obviously 2 weeks before the Olympics, and to get a bronze medal in the World Cup was honestly probably one of my career highlights. Just going into the Olympics, it probably couldn't have been a better timing, and put me on a high. And yeah, so going obviously into the 2010, I wasn't going in. I was going in to get experience points, but I had to. Obviously, my main aim was to try and get into the finals, and with doing so, that was obviously really cool. My family were out watching, and yeah, it's definitely looking back. It's such a strange feeling. At the time, you're so focused on your sport, but afterwards you start to realize like everything that's just happened. It's very surreal. So yeah, it's one of those things, when you do something that you love doing, and it takes you to these sort of events and places. I mean, I wouldn't change it for the world. It truly is amazing. But yeah, going obviously fast forwarding another 4 years, a lot of training obviously taking part, and I've got obviously built up the experience. Going into 2014, this time we're in Russia, and much different setup than what I was used to before. I think that as far as the kind of Olympics goes, it was challenging. I think I'd kind of gone into Russia with a bit of an injury as well. Performance wise, wasn't as great as I'd hoped. But again, it was another one of those things where I thought, right, after that one, having not placed as well as I did in Vancouver, I thought, right, I better get back to the drawing board, and aim for the next one, which was Korea, Pyeongchang, in 2018. And come 2016, I actually had like a really bad crash. I basically went over this jump, got stuck upside down in the air, and came down really hard on my back and broke my pelvis. My femur had kind of shoved so hard into my pelvic socket that it ended up cracking the socket, and I couldn't walk for about 6 weeks. And that just completely knocked everything back. And when you get an injury like that, you start you realize then you're like, oh my God, this I've got to now start thinking about my future. Am I going to be okay? Are my sponsors going to still support me? That sort of thing. So really at that point then, I had to sort of wait to see if I was going to come back. And I think after a year, I managed to actually like enter one of the winter seasons. So I managed to compete a little bit. Well, actually, no, I wasn't competing. I was just training. And then come the end of the season, it came round to the British Championships. And I think at that point then, I kind of realised that I wasn't going to qualify for the Pyeongchang Olympics. So I had to make a decision on which event was going to be my first and which one was going to be my last. So there was an event at the very end of the season. I just got back on my feet, and it was the British Championships out in Switzerland. And I went in there a little bit open-minded, but I actually got chatting to one of the BBC journalists, Anna Thompson, and she just said to me, "So Ben, what's your plans like for next year and that?" And I actually, weirdly enough, just came up with a decision there and then when she started speaking to me, and I just said, if I win the British Championships, I think I'm gonna hang up my boots and I'm gonna retire on a high. So, once the sort of British Champs started, it was obviously the half pipe that I was entered in. I did well in qualifying, got through to finals, and then ended up competing. I landed 2 really good runs, and that put me into first place. So when I got called out onto the podium, I made that decision at that point. That was when I realized, okay, I'm probably gonna, that's it then, retire, leave my boots on the stage. And pretty much almost 5 minutes after I'd kind of done that, and she actually published an article of me saying that I'd retired. And I just remember reading it and thinking, oh well, I can't go back now. So it was it was actually a nice way to go out. It was one of those things where I look back, I'm kind of glad that I finished on a high. In this sort of career, you really don't want to fizzle out in some sports. I think it's sometimes better to bow out than it is just to kind of just simmer away. So yeah, so that pretty much sums up my my snowboard career. Obviously, long story short, But then moving on, I actually overlapped the end of my career with opening up a gym, and going back to the whole what kind of stemmed the sort of gym. When I was coming home on a regular basis from these snowboard trips, I was having to drive an hour into Aberdeen training, and then I'd have to drive home back. And I just remember this commute over time. I mean, it was brutal. I was having to literally go drive, get stuck in traffic, train for an hour, and then come home stuck in traffic. And it just took so much of my time up. So I made a point of basically saying that if there was no gym in Banbury by the time I retire, I'll try and open up one myself. So me and the family kind of got together, and when I finally retired, I think we kind of made a family decision then to open up the gym. And yeah, I mean, to start with, we moved into this really small little unit, and it blew up in terms of sort of interest. We actually had to stop the membership because it just kind of grew and grew and grew, and the room wasn't big enough to hold more than sort of 9-10 people at a time. So it really kind of it became very apparent at that point that we needed a bigger premises. So about 7 months later, after starting the business, we found a new place, a new building, one that I'm in right now. And it was way bigger. We're talking probably like 10 or 20 times the size. And we really haven't looked back since. We've managed to get to the point now, 7 years later, since that first gym that we opened. It's become a complete central hub, and we really feel now that we serve the community. We've taught a lot of people about fitness, health and wellness. It's been a huge part of a lot of people's lives already, and I can see it being a huge part of so many people's lives in the future as well. We look after and cater for first-time gym goers to young athletes, to Olympians. We've had a few sort of kind of celebrities coming in when they're kind of staying up in the area. And I mean, we've got a vast array of people, and we've probably got about 13-14 staff. All our coaches are busy, they're out the door. It's been one of the best moves I think that we've ever done, and best decisions certainly think that I've ever done in helping the local community. So yeah, so now my role now is basically I'm a coach, part-time business owner, and yeah, I do compete now as well. I've kind of got more into the sort of competitive CrossFit side of things, and that's more like a hobby. But I found that once I'd finished snowboarding, I really was missing a huge piece. And I mean, I think when you're so used to competing pretty much most of your life, when you no longer have that sort of competitive side, and test that you regularly want, I think you almost you go and search for it. So I mean, if I wasn't competing in this sort of stuff, I would probably have found something else to do. But it certainly keeps my sort of mental state in check, because I always feel like I'm going to be like this for forevermore. So yeah. So just to kind of conclude everything up, it's been the most kind of incredible life. I mean, it still feels like I'm just getting started. And yeah, I think that what kind of happens now, obviously we've got a bright future in helping so many more people. We've got people coming through. So, but yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Hi, Ben. That's amazing. What a journey you've been on. And to start, I mean, at 13, that's when you kind of started competing and everything. I mean, that's quite a young age.
Yeah, I feel like when we were just getting started, that, I mean, it was so daunting at the time. I remember, like,
Yeah.
I'm used to doing, like, I don't know, small athletic competitions and maybe a football match every now and then when I was younger. But yeah, snowboarding side just seemed far more frightening.
And I mean, at that age, I mean, at 16, you know, competing against some of these guys, I mean, you must have felt like under such a huge amount of pressure. I mean, how did you deal with that? Did you, I mean, obviously you had family around you, which helped, but is there any tips for people if they're doing things competitively, feeling under pressure, any kind of coping mechanisms that you've
Yeah,
tried that have worked?
no, it's a good question, because I think we're dealing with the sort of psychological side to so many. I mean, you can apply these things to everything, but
Yeah, absolutely.
what I really found really helped me. I actually went through a sports psychologist for a while, and he sort of unlocked a few doors. And I think that he got me doing all sorts of little drills, like thinking of a color, and that color, I've got to think of 3 happy words. So like I would think of the color, I would do the 3 words, it would put me in a good state. And I think after a while that it sort of, it reminds you to be a bit more calm. I think that so many of us get ourselves so worked up before things, before races or competing, that I find that the best state that we can all be in is a calmer state. I think certainly for a sort of skill-based sport, where I think you need to be calm, you need to be chilled, you can't be jittery. I think for, obviously, like, I don't know, maybe your 100-meter sprint track athletes, they would want to get themselves fired up. They want their heart rate kind of a little bit before. But so there's a time and a place to have these sort of different scenarios. But I find that, let's say a 10K runner, they don't want to be fully agitated at the start line. They want to be calm, collected. They want to stick to their pace that they know. They don't want to let the adrenaline take over. So being in these mental states, I find, you obviously are always going to be, there's always going to be a time where you experience this for the first time, and you're going to let the nerves take over that little bit. But the more that you do this, the better you'll get. The body actually becomes really accustomed to competing, even if it's just a challenge, that sort of thing. So I find, being in a sort of calmer state does help with a majority of scenarios.
And then say things, I mean, obviously, like it's a very broad question here, but I mean, the biggest, you know, if you had to think of maybe like 2 or 3 biggest lessons you learned from your journey, what would they be?
I think, would you say, are you meaning more from like a performance point of view, or just
I
in general?
suppose in general, I mean,
I would definitely say that if I look back, if I was to basically repeat my life again, in a weird sense, I would have probably introduced the gym, the fitness training at an earlier stage. I think, going back to my old self, I see youngsters now on the gym floor, and I wish I was doing the stuff that they were doing. And I sort of think I wasn't doing anything that they were doing at their age. So that would definitely be one thing. I would definitely be introducing fitness, at a younger stage. And then, I know fitness is quite a broad term, but nutrition is another one. I wish I knew what I knew now, regarding nutrition. I mean, nutrition is it is your only energy supply. I mean, our hearts keep beating because we're eating and we're drinking water. It's like, that is quite a simple term to put it, but you can actually fine tune performance all down to what you eat, and obviously supply your body with. I mean, you've heard people calling things like, oh, you need race fuel, like your carbohydrates, that sort of thing. So I mean, when I think back to some of my competing days, I was eating the worst stuff. I was sleeping terribly. I wasn't drinking nearly enough. I mean, I could have probably performed a lot better if I had known these things. And I actually, I remember speaking to a nutritionist, And I remember them relaying all these things at me, and it was just going over my head. I was like not interested.
Do you think it's because there wasn't quite perhaps so much of that around, going back to then? Like things have moved on a lot, haven't they? Even just in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I actually think that without it being disrespectful, the people that were offering this advice sometimes, I just wasn't. I don't know if I was just interested in it at all. Meanwhile, if I speak to nutrition to some of the athletes here, I can see that they're far more engaged, because I feel like I've kind of been there, done that. But also, I don't want to take anything away from nutritionists out there, but I feel like if they've gone and done something themselves that's a big feat, I think they gain the respect from their individuals that they're doing it for. So if they're trying to portray how important nutritionists, and they've been out there, they train hard themselves, I think they get far more respect that way. So I think like I say, no disrespect to any of them at all, but I find that the youngsters are far more engaging. If they see that what you're doing is working, they want to do what you're doing. So that's probably my second thing. So first one being fitness, second one being nutrition, and then probably the last one, I would just say, probably a hard one, but I would probably save more money.
Yeah, wouldn't we all?
I've probably spent money on things that I probably shouldn't have. I've bought too many shoes, that sort of thing. So I mean, if I could go back, I would definitely save in more money.
Yeah, well, that sounds honest, if nothing else, Ben.
Yeah.
Super. Well, that was amazing. We'll hopefully be seeing some more of Ben in the coming months. So keep an eye out on your RigRun app. And also we have an excitement announcement to be making for 2024 as well. So thank you for now, Ben. That was amazing. And this webinar has been recorded and will be available for viewing on the RigRun Recovery Zone. Speak to you soon.
All right, perfect.
Thanks, Dan. Bye.
Bye-bye.